Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly chilling journey back to the remote, often snow-swept villages of Joseon Dynasty, Korea, a land famed for its rich cultural heritage and its strict Confucian society. But we're not focusing on the grandeur of the palaces or the wisdom of the scholars. Instead, we're pulling back the rough hemp curtain to uncover how a Joseon peasant survived a brutal and taxing winter. Forget cozy fireplaces and abundant food. You're about to discover a grim reality where the cold was an enemy, hunger a constant companion, and every day was a desperate struggle for survival against the relentless forces of nature and the unyielding demands of the state. This wasn't a season of rest. It was a period of profound misery where a single miscalculation or stroke of bad luck could mean a slow, agonizing death. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the first month of a Joseon winter without longing for spring, let alone an entire season. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in a small, humble hanok, a traditional Korean house, somewhere in a rural village in Joseon, Korea, perhaps during the 17th or 18th century. The air is already crisp, carrying the scent of drying grain and the distant tang of wood smoke. Outside, the vibrant colors of autumn are fading, replaced by the somber grays and browns that signal the impending arrival of winter. You are a simple peasant, a farmer, your life inextricably linked to the land and the rhythms of the seasons, your family, perhaps your elderly parents, your wife, and your young children, huddled together, their faces etched with the familiar anxiety that accompanies this time of year. Your greatest dread is not war or plague, but the coming cold. This is the autumn's end, and the cruel calculation of the harvest has already begun, determining your family's very survival through the brutal months ahead. The entire existence of a Joseon peasant revolved around the harvest chusu. This was the culmination of a year's relentless labor, plowing, planting, weeding, and nurturing your crops. The success of this harvest was not just about economic well-being. It was literally a matter of life and death. If the rice paddies yielded a bountiful crop, if the millet fields were full, and if the vegetable patches thrived, your family might have enough to eat through the lean winter months. But a poor harvest, caused by drought, flood, pests, or disease, meant immediate catastrophe. Imagine the agony of watching your livelihood wither on the stalk, knowing that every lost grain translated directly into future hunger and cold for your loved ones. It truly sucked to gamble your life on the weather. The process of harvest itself was backbreaking. From early autumn, you, your family, and often your entire village would be out in the fields from dawn till dusk, cutting rice stalks with sickles, threshing grain to separate the kernels, and meticulously drying the harvested crops. Every single grain was precious, carefully collected, cleaned, and stored. This was a race against time, as the impending cold meant that any crop left exposed could be ruined by frost or snow. Your hands would be raw and blistered, your back aching, and your body perpetually exhausted, driven by the desperate urgency to secure enough food for survival. Once harvested, your grains, primarily rice esal, sal, barley bori, and millet gijang, would be meticulously stored. You might keep them in large earthenware jars ongi within your home, or in simple granaries, but even stored grain was never entirely safe. Pests like rodents, rats, and mice and insects, weevils would constantly threaten your precious reserves, gnawing through sacks and contaminating your food. Imagine the constant anxiety, constantly checking your stores, trying to protect every single grain from unseen enemies, knowing that any loss chipped away at your chances of survival. The direct calculation of the harvest determined how many mouths could be fed, how much tax could be paid, and how much fuel could be acquired for heating. A typical peasant family aimed to harvest enough to pay taxes segum, a significant portion of your harvest, often a third or more, was owed to the government, the state, your local landlord, or your noble overseer. These taxes were usually levied in grain, regardless of your personal needs, and failure to pay could lead to severe punishment, including physical beatings, confiscation of land, or even forced labor. This obligation was relentless, a constant drain on your meager resources. Save seeds for next year's planting. You couldn't eat all your harvest. A portion had to be meticulously set aside for the spring planting, ensuring the continuity of your livelihood. This was a critical investment in your future, but it also meant sacrificing immediate consumption. Feed your family the remaining portion. After taxes and seeds was all that was left to feed your entire family through the brutal winter, usually for 5 to 6 months. This often meant living on starvation rations, barely enough to sustain life, let alone provide proper nutrition. Acquire necessities. Any tiny surplus might be traded for other essential goods like salt, cloth, or tools, or for fuel to heat your home. This inherent precariousness of the harvest meant that a Joseon peasant always lived on the brink of subsistence. There were no vast reserves, no government-sponsored food banks, and no global supply chains to bail you out if your local harvest failed. Your entire existence was a direct reflection of the land's bounty, and the winter months were the ultimate test of its generosity. One common misconception is that all Joseon peasants were constantly starving, while famine was a recurring threat, and many lived on the brink of subsistence. A successful harvest could indeed provide enough calories for basic survival. However, survival rarely meant good nutrition or comfort. The problem was the constant uncertainty, the lack of buffer, and the prevalence of chronic malnutrition even in good years. Historians still meticulously study Joseon Dynasty agricultural records, tax registers, and administrative documents like the Silic, the veritable records of the Joseon Dynasty, to understand the precise agricultural yields, tax burdens, and their direct impact on peasant livelihoods, consistently revealing a precarious, subsistence-level existence for the vast majority. Furthermore, the act of collecting and preparing fuel for the winter was directly linked to the harvest. Your primary heating system was the ondol, a unique underfloor heating system fueled by burning wood or straw in a hearth, sending hot air through flues beneath the floor. This required immense quantities of fuel, which had to be gathered and prepared during the autumn. If your harvest was poor, you might have less straw to burn, or less time to collect firewood, directly impacting your ability to stay warm during the biting cold, creating a brutal feedback loop between food security and warmth. The psychological toll of living under such a system was immense. The autumn harvest was not a joyous celebration of abundance, but a time of intense anxiety, meticulous calculation, and profound fear. Every grain threshed, every bundle of straw gathered, was weighed against the terrifying prospect of a cold, hungry winter. The memory of past famines, the sight of neighbors struggling, and the constant awareness of your own vulnerability would instill a deep-seated conservatism, a reluctance to take risks, and a pervasive sense of dread that would only intensify as the first snows began to fall. Your life was a constant battle against the elements, and the harvest was merely the first skirmish. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was inextricably linked to autumn's end, where the harvest's cruel calculation determined your family's very survival through the coming brutal winter. The relentless labor, the precision of storage, and the pervasive fear of crop failure were the first, and perhaps most foundational, aspects of how a Joseon peasant survived a brutal and taxing winter. Having secured your meager harvest, the grim calculation of survival continued into the next crucial, and often desperate, phase: food preservation. Forget modern canning or freezing. Your life as a Joseon peasant depended on meticulous, labor-intensive, and often precarious methods of storing enough food to last through the lean, brutal winter months, making your survival strategy profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine the scene in your humble hanok as autumn gives way to the biting cold. Every available space, from your small courtyard to the corners of your dwelling, would be utilized for storing the precious harvest. The air would be filled with the earthy scent of drying grains and vegetables, a testament to the immense effort required to make your food last. This wasn't about culinary finesse. It was about sheer necessity and a desperate battle against spoilage and pests. It truly sucked to have your pantry be your entire home, the most iconic, and arguably most vital. Food preservation method in Joseon Korea was kimchi. Imagine literally hundreds of cabbage heads, carefully harvested, salted, rinsed, and then meticulously coated with a pungent, spicy mixture of chili powder, garlic, ginger, scallions, radishes, and fermented seafood. This labor-intensive process, typically undertaken by the women of the household, would consume days or even weeks in late autumn kimjang season. The prepared kimchi would then be packed tightly into large earthenware jars, ongi, which would be buried partly underground in the courtyard to keep them at a stable, cool temperature, allowing the kimchi to ferment slowly over the winter. This fermentation not only preserved the vegetables, but also created beneficial bacteria and, crucially, provided essential vitamins, especially vitamin C, that would be otherwise scarce during the long winter months, helping to ward off debilitating diseases like scurvy. It truly sucked to have your main source of vitamins be fermented cabbage. Beyond kimchi, other vegetables would be preserved through equally arduous methods. Drying radishes, gourds, and wild greens would be thinly sliced and hung from the eaves of your hanok or strung up inside your home, slowly shriveling in the dry air. This process removed moisture, inhibiting microbial growth, but left the vegetables tough and often flavorless, requiring extensive rehydration before consumption. Salting root vegetables and wild herbs might be heavily salted and packed into jars, a simple but effective method of drawing out moisture and inhibiting decay. Like salted fish, these would need thorough rinsing before eating. Adding to the blandness of your diet, grains, primarily rice, barley, and millet, would be your absolute staple. These precious kernels, threshed and dried after the harvest, would be stored in large earthenware jars, woven baskets, or wooden chests inside your home. However, even dried grains were perpetually vulnerable to pests. Imagine constantly checking your grain stores, listening for the telltale rustle of rodents, rats, and mice, or spotting the tiny trails of weevils and other insects. These pests could contaminate your food, gnaw through sacks, and consume a significant portion of your precious reserves. You would try every rudimentary method to deter them, sealing jars with mud, lighting smoky fires, or even keeping cats. But it was a constant, losing battle against these ubiquitous enemies. It really sucked to share your food with vermin. Meat was a luxury, rarely consumed fresh, but when an animal was slaughtered, typically a pig or goat in autumn, its meat would be meticulously preserved through salting or smoking. Imagine hanging strips of meat over a smoky fire inside your hammock for days, or packing it in layers of salt. A pungent process that filled your home with the smell of curing flesh. These methods, while effective, rendered the meat incredibly tough, intensely salty, and often with a pervasive smoky flavor that would dominate any dish. Fresh meat was almost unheard of in winter. Fish, if you lived near the coast or a river, would also be preserved, usually through extensive drying or salting. Stockfish, tough and leathery, would be a common sight. Hung from racks outside or stored indoors, its preparation involved rehydrating through pounding or soaking, a tedious process that rarely made it palatable. The constant concern of food spoilage and contamination was immense, without modern refrigeration or understanding of microbiology. Food could easily rot, grow mold, or harbor dangerous bacteria, especially if preservation methods were imperfect or conditions were too humid. Consuming spoiled food was a frequent reality, leading to agonizing stomach cramps, relentless diarrhea, dysentery, and other debilitating foodborne illnesses that, in a world without antibiotics, could easily turn fatal. You were perpetually gambling with your digestion, knowing that every bite might nourish you or make you violently ill. It truly sucked to live in constant fear of your own food. The psychological toll of this constant battle against spoilage and the pervasive fear of hunger was immense. You would spend countless hours preparing and securing your food, driven by the desperate knowledge that your family's survival hinged on its successful preservation. Every withered vegetable, every spoiled grain, every sign of a rodent infestation would be a source of profound anxiety, a direct threat to your existence. This constant vigilance, this relentless effort to outwit decay and hunger, would leave you exhausted and perpetually worried. One common misconception is that all Joseon peasants were constantly living on the brink of starvation, with no real food security, while famine was a recurring threat, and many lived at a subsistence level. The meticulous preservation techniques like kimjang, kimchi making, and extensive grain storage were crucial survival strategies that, in good harvest years, allowed families to manage through the winter without acute starvation, though usually with chronic malnutrition. The ingenuity of these preservation methods highlights the resilience and resourcefulness of Joseon agricultural communities. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Joseon period food storage techniques like kimchi jars and granary remains, as well as detailed administrative records of food production and distribution. To understand the precise mix of subsistence and survival strategies employed by peasant households, furthermore, the very act of fermentation, central to kimchi and many other preserved foods, was a sophisticated form of ancient food science. While they didn't understand the microorganisms involved, Joseon Koreans empirically mastered the controlled fermentation process, which not only preserved food, but also enhanced its flavor, nutritional value, and digestibility, turning perishable ingredients into stable, life-sustaining staples for the long winter. This scientific intuition, refined over centuries, was a silent hero of Joseon peasant survival. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was defined by a profound and relentless dedication to food preservation. From the monumental task of making kimchi to the meticulous storage of grains and the arduous curing of meats, every effort was a desperate battle against spoilage, pests, and the looming threat of winter starvation. This meticulous, labor-intensive, and often precarious process, essential for your family's survival, made your winter existence profoundly brutal and taxing. Even as you meticulously preserved every morsel of food, your struggle for survival against the harsh Joseon winter brought you to the very core of your daily misery, your hanok itself. Forget a cozy, perfectly insulated home. This traditional Korean house was a deceptive comfort, a constant battleground against the biting cold, making your winter existence profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine your home, a hanok hanog. A traditional Korean house is renowned for its unique architectural features, particularly its ondol, the underfloor heating system. In theory, ondol allowed for warm floors, a revolutionary concept for comfort in a cold climate. But in practice, for a peasant, your hanok was a delicate balance of ingenuity and profound inadequacy, constantly battling the relentless chill that seeped through every crack. It truly sucked to live in a house that was both warm and freezing. Your hanok, while providing shelter, was often poorly insulated by modern standards. The walls, typically made of earth and wood, offered limited protection against the brutal winds and sub-zero temperatures of a Joseon winter. The paper-thin hanji traditional Korean paper windows, while allowing some light to filter in, were incredibly poor at retaining heat. Imagine feeling the biting wind whistle through unseen gaps in the walls, creating a constant draft that chilled you to the bone, even as the floor beneath you radiated a precarious warmth. You might huddle together with your family in the warmest corner of the room, near the small agungi fireplace that fueled the ondol, but the rest of the house would remain frigid. The ondol system, while ingenious, was a constant source of labor and anxiety. It worked by channeling hot smoke and gases from a small external fireplace, agungi, through flues built beneath the stone floor of the room. This heated the floor, providing radiant heat. However, maintaining this warmth required an immense, constant supply of fuel, primarily wood and straw. As a peasant, every bundle of straw from your meager harvest, every piece of firewood painstakingly gathered from the mountains, was precious. You would spend countless hours each day feeding the agungi, ensuring a continuous burn to keep the floors warm, knowing that any lapse meant a rapid descent into freezing discomfort. The need for fuel was relentless, a constant drain on your time and energy that would often take you out into the bitter cold. It really sucked to feed your floor constantly. The smoke from the agungi, even with a rudimentary chimney, could often seep back into the living space, particularly if the ondol system was old, damaged, or poorly maintained. Imagine breathing in air thick with wood smoke, irritating your eyes and lungs, and contributing to chronic respiratory problems. The air inside your hanok might feel warm from the ondol, but it was often far from clean. A trade-off for staying alive. It really sucked to warm yourself by choking on smoke. The cold outside your heated floor was pervasive, while the ondol kept your floor warm. The air above it, especially near the walls or windows, could still be bitterly cold. Water left in a bucket overnight might freeze. Your breath would fog in the air unless you were directly above the warmest part of the ondol. This constant juxtaposition of warm floor and cold air, particularly in larger hanoks, meant that even inside your home, you were perpetually battling the cold, forcing you to wear layers of clothes even indoors. Lack of proper insulation in the walls and ceilings meant that a significant amount of heat simply escaped. This made your efforts to fuel the ondol even more taxing, as you were constantly trying to heat a poorly sealed space. Drafts would seep in through cracks around doors and windows, requiring you to constantly patch gaps with paper or cloth, a futile effort against the pervasive cold. The communal living within the hanok, while providing some shared warmth, also exacerbated other problems. Several family members, sometimes even an extended family, would huddle together in the warmest, ondol-heated room. This cramped proximity, while offering a sense of security, also meant rapid spread of disease, which we will discuss in Chapter 7, and increased consumption of precious fuel and food resources. It truly sucked to share your only warm spot with everyone. One common misconception is that all Joseon hanaks were highly efficient and perfectly warm due to the ondol system. While ondol was ingenious, its effectiveness varied greatly depending on the quality of construction, the availability of fuel, and the specific design for poor peasants. Hanaks were often simpler, less well-built, and relied on constant, labor-intensive fueling to provide even basic warmth, the ideal of a perfectly heated. Comfortable hanak was often more a reality for the wealthy elite than for the common peasant. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of ondol structures in peasant dwellings and compare them with aristocratic residences, as well as administrative records detailing fuel consumption. To understand the precise effectiveness and labor demands of heating for different social classes. Furthermore, the very design of the ondol, with its external agunga, meant you had to constantly venture outside, even into the bitter cold. To fuel the fire, this repeated exposure, however brief, would chip away at your body's warmth and resilience, making you vulnerable to chills and respiratory illnesses. Your effort to stay warm inherently involved exposing yourself to the very element you were trying to fight. The psychological toll of living in a home that was constantly cold, despite your efforts to heat it, would be immense. You would live with perpetual discomfort, your body stiff, your movements sluggish, the constant anxiety about having enough fuel, the fear of the agungi going out in the middle of the night, would erode your peace of mind. Your home, meant to be a sanctuary, was a constant battleground against the elements, turning every day into a test of endurance against the cold that permeated your very dwelling. This relentless, personal war with your own house was a profound misery. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because your very home, the hanak, was a deceptive comfort, its battle against the cold, characterized by inadequate insulation, drafty windows, and the relentless, labor-intensive demand for fuel for its ondol system, made every moment an intimate struggle. This pervasive physical discomfort, ensuring you were constantly fighting against the biting cold even indoors, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your winter survival. Even as your body shivered in your hanak and your days were consumed by fueling the ondol, your primary defense against the biting Joseon winter was your clothing. Forget modern thermal wear and down-filled coats. Your rough, rudimentary garments offered only meager protection against the freezing temperatures and snow, making your winter survival profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine the constant chill that permeated your every waking moment. Your wardrobe, as a Joseon peasant, was incredibly simple, prioritizing durability and basic functionality over warmth or comfort. Your core garment would be hemp or cotton clothing, typically an outer jacket, joguri, and trousers baji for men, or a long skirt chima for women, often in natural, undyed shades of white, gray, or brown. These fabrics, while breathable in summer, offered very little insulation against the biting cold of winter. Imagine the thin cloth doing little to stop the icy wind from seeping into your bones, constantly making you shiver. It truly sucked to be perpetually underdressed to combat the cold. Your strategy relied almost entirely on layering. You would wear multiple layers of these thin hemp or cotton garments, one over the other, to trap what little body heat you could generate. Imagine pulling on a second, then a third, and perhaps even a fourth pair of trousers and jackets, making your movements stiff and cumbersome. This layering, while necessary, limited your agility and added bulk, making physical labor even more taxing. The sheer weight and stiffness of so many layers of rough fabric would be a constant. Uncomfortable presence, it really sucked to move like a bundled up snowman. For additional warmth, especially during chores or outdoor work, you might wear padded garments somos, some-ut, which were made by quilting cotton batting or raw cotton fibers between layers of fabric. These offered better insulation but were still often insufficient against sub-zero temperatures and biting winds. They also became heavy and damp if they absorbed sweat or snow, which would then leach away your precious body heat, leading to even greater chilling. Imagine your padded coat, your only real defense, slowly becoming a damp, icy weight on your body. Your footwear offered equally meager protection. You would typically wear simple straw, shoes, gypsum, or rough leather sandals, often without thick socks. These offered virtually no insulation against the frozen ground or snow. Your feet would be perpetually cold, numb with frostbite, and prone to severe cracking or chilblains, painful inflammation of small blood vessels in the skin due to cold exposure. Imagine your toes aching with persistent cold, making every step on frozen ground a torment. This lack of proper foot protection was a constant source of discomfort and potential injury, especially when working outdoors. It truly sucked to have frozen feet all winter. Your head and hands would also be vulnerable, while you might have simple caps or scarves made of rough cloth, and perhaps crude mittens. These offered minimal protection against severe wind chill or frostbite. Your fingers, constantly exposed to the biting cold during outdoor chores like gathering firewood or tending animals, would become stiff, painfully numb, and prone to frostbite, making fine motor tasks incredibly difficult and agonizing. Frostbite could lead to blackened, dead tissue, resulting in the permanent loss of fingers or toes, a devastating consequence for a laborer. It really sucked to literally lose your fingers to the cold. The limited effectiveness of your clothing meant that you were perpetually expending precious caloric energy just to keep warm. Your body would constantly be shivering, diverting resources to maintain its core temperature, leaving you with less energy for labor, less resilience against disease, and a pervasive sense of fatigue. This constant internal battle against the cold, fueled by insufficient food, chipped away at your vitality, making every winter a profound test of endurance. One common misconception is that all Joseon peasants had access to warm, well-made clothing. In reality, while some might have owned a few padded garments, the vast majority relied on simple, rough fabrics like hemp and basic layering. Animal furs, while warmer, were often too expensive for common peasants, or reserved for specific uses. The overall quality and quantity of clothing were often insufficient to truly protect against the harsh Korean winters, leading to widespread suffering from cold exposure. Historians still meticulously studied Joseon period sumptuary laws which dictated what commoners could wear, archaeological findings of textile fragments from peasant dwellings, and contemporary administrative records which sometimes mention relief efforts during severe winters to understand the precise types of clothing available and their effectiveness in combating the cold. Furthermore, the act of working outdoors, even in the depths of winter, as we'll discuss in Chapter 6, meant that your clothing would inevitably become damp from sweat or snow. This dampness, combined with freezing temperatures, would rapidly leach away your body heat, turning your garments into instruments of chilling discomfort. Imagine your clothes becoming heavy and cold, clinging to your skin, making you even more vulnerable to hypothermia and frostbite. Drying clothes would be a constant challenge in a small, damp hammock, often leading to sleeping in cold, clammy garments, perpetuating the misery. The psychological toll of being perpetually cold, of constantly shivering, and of knowing your meager clothes offered insufficient protection would be immense. You would live with a constant sense of physical discomfort, your movements slow and stiff, your mind focused on little else, but staying warm. The visible signs of frostbite on your neighbors, the pervasive coughs from respiratory illnesses, would be constant reminders of the clothing's inadequacy. This constant physical battle with the elements, a daily testament to your rough garments' limitations, made every winter a profound psychological burden. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because your primary defense against the brutal winter was your meager clothing, the rough, thin garments, requiring endless layering and offering insufficient protection against freezing temperatures, snow, and biting winds, made every moment an intimate struggle, this pervasive physical discomfort, ensuring you were constantly fighting against the cold, even in your own home, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your winter survival, directly contributing to widespread suffering and premature death. Even as your body shivered in inadequate clothing and your hanok struggled to keep the cold at bay, your very survival through the Joseon winter hinged on a constant, arduous, and often dangerous chore fueling the ondol. Forget convenient modern heating. Gathering enough firewood and straw was a relentless, physically destructive task, making your daily winter existence profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine your daily reality, your hanok's ondol, the unique underfloor heating system, was a marvel of ancient engineering designed to bring warmth to your home by channeling hot smoke and gases from a small external fireplace, agungi. However, this ingenious system was a voracious consumer of fuel to keep your floors warm, to prevent your family from freezing, and to even cook your meager meals. You needed an immense, continuous supply of wood and straw. This wasn't a one-time collection. It was a daily, non-negotiable demand that consumed a significant portion of your waking hours. It truly sucked to literally burn your precious resources for warmth. Your primary fuel sources were straw, jip, the byproduct of your autumn rice or barley harvest. Every bundle of straw, diligently collected and stored, was not just for animal feed or crafting, it was crucial for your survival through the winter. Burning straw provided a quick, intense burst of heat to the ondol, but it burned rapidly, requiring constant replenishment. Imagine the immense satisfaction of knowing your hard-won harvest could keep your family warm, even as you watched it literally go up in smoke. Firewood delgam, titegum for sustained heat, particularly for the long, cold nights. You relied on firewood. This meant arduous, often dangerous, journeys into the surrounding mountains and forests. You would spend countless hours, often in the biting cold, hacking away at trees with crude axes, breaking off dead branches, and hauling heavy bundles of wood back to your hanok. The deeper the snow, the harder the ground, the more challenging and exhausting this chore became. It really sucked to work yourself to death just to stay warm. The physical toll of gathering fuel was immense. Your hands, already calloused from farming, would become numb with cold, prone to frostbite, and aching from wielding a heavy axe or carrying cumbersome loads of wood. Your back and shoulders would ache from hauling heavy bundles over uneven, icy terrain, often through deep snow. Your body would be perpetually tired, your energy rapidly depleted by the constant physical exertion in freezing temperatures. This wasn't just a chore, it was another form of backbreaking labor that directly impacted your physical health and resilience. The dangers of fuel gathering were constant. Ventures into the mountains in winter exposed you to severe cold exposure. risking hypothermia and debilitating frostbite, which could lead to blackened, dead tissue, and the permanent loss of fingers or toes. The uneven, snow-covered terrain hid treacherous ice patches, loose rocks, and unseen pitfalls, increasing the risk of falls and severe injuries like broken bones or sprains. Far from any effective medical help, you might encounter wild animals or even bandits, making every trip to the forest a gamble with your life. It really sucked to face death just to gather firewood. The need for fuel was relentless and pervasive. It dictated your daily rhythm. You would be constantly aware of your dwindling fuel supply, knowing that a single miscalculation or an unexpected cold snap could mean a night of freezing temperatures for your family. This constant anxiety about having enough to burn added a significant psychological burden to your already arduous physical labor. The success of your fuel gathering directly translated into your family's comfort, or their suffering. One common misconception is that all Joseon peasants had easy access to abundant firewood. In reality, as populations grew, local forests around villages could become depleted, forcing peasants to travel further and further into remote, often dangerous, mountain areas to find sufficient fuel. This increased the labor burden and the inherent dangers, making fuel gathering a constant challenge, especially during harsh winters. Historians still meticulously study ancient deforestation patterns, records of fuel prices in markets, and administrative decrees related to forest management to understand the precise challenges faced by Joseon peasants in acquiring heating fuel. Furthermore, the act of tending the agongi itself was a constant chore throughout the day and night. You couldn't just load it once. The straw burned quickly, requiring frequent replenishment. You would need to monitor the fire, ensuring it burned efficiently and sent warmth through the ondol flues, but also preventing too much smoke from seeping back into the living space. This constant attention to the hearth, even during periods of minimal light or rest, further consumed your limited energy and time. Your moments of warmth were earned through perpetual vigilance and effort. The psychological toll of living in a home that was constantly cold unless you actively fed its belly, of constantly venturing into the bitter cold to gather its sustenance, would be immense. You would live with perpetual physical discomfort, your muscles aching, your fingers numb, and your mind consumed by the relentless demand for fuel, the fear of running out, the knowledge that your family's warmth hinged entirely on your unyielding labor would erode your peace of mind, making your home a constant battleground against the elements and ensuring that every winter was a profound psychological burden. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because your very survival hinged on fueling the ondol, the relentless, physically destructive labor of gathering wood and straw, performed in biting cold and often dangerous conditions, was a constant, arduous chore. This pervasive physical discomfort, ensuring you were constantly fighting against the cold, even in your own home, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your winter survival, directly contributing to widespread suffering and premature death. Even as your body suffered the relentless cold, the hunger, and the constant toil of gathering fuel, your life as a Joseon peasant was far from sedentary during winter. Forget resting under blankets. The land, however dormant, still demanded your attention, making winter labor a demanding, often painful, continuation of your brutal and taxing existence. Imagine the bitter cold of a Joseon winter day. The ground is hard and frozen, perhaps covered with a thick blanket of snow. The wind whips across the fields, biting at any exposed skin, yet you are not resting. Your very survival and the preparation for the next planting season demands that you continue to work, transforming the harsh winter landscape into another arduous battlefield. It truly sucked to work yourself to death in the snow. One of the most common and vital winter labors was maintaining agricultural tools, your plows, hoes, sickles, and other implements. Essential for the spring planting, would need constant repair and sharpening. You would spend hours in your small, often dimly lit, workshop or communal area, hunched over dull blades, trying to sharpen them with primitive files or grinding stones. Your fingers would be numb with cold, making fine tasks difficult, and the repetitive motions would lead to aching muscles and joints. This was crucial work. A dull plowshare in spring could mean a ruined harvest. So you toiled through the winter to ensure your tools were ready. It really sucked to fix tools with frozen fingers. Gathering firewood and straw for the ondol, as discussed in Chapter 5, was a continuous, demanding chore that often took you out into the harshest elements. You would spend hours traversing snow-covered mountains, hacking at frozen trees, and hauling heavy bundles back to your hanok. This was not a quick trip. It was a daily, physically destructive expedition, exposing you to frostbite, hypothermia, and the risk of falls on icy terrain. Your primary means of staying warm inherently involved enduring extreme, cold, and strenuous physical exertion. Beyond tool maintenance and fuel gathering, other essential tasks demanded your labor. Dredging and maintaining irrigation canals. Even in winter, frozen canals needed attention. You might be part of a communal labor gang, breaking ice, clearing debris, and deepening canals to ensure proper water flow when the spring thaw arrived. This involved working in icy water or on slippery banks, facing extreme cold and the risk of falls, manure collection and preparation. To fertilize your fields for the next planting season, you would need to collect and prepare manure. This often involved breaking frozen animal waste from stables or communal piles and transporting it to designated areas. This was a messy, unpleasant, and physically demanding task, performed in the biting cold. Crafting and repairing household items. Winter was often a time for creating or repairing household goods. Weaving straw mats or ropes, mending clothing, repairing wooden utensils, or preparing fishing nets. While these tasks might be done indoors, they were still laborious, consuming much of your limited daylight hours and demanding fine motor skills from cold, stiffened fingers. Threshing stored grain. Although much of the harvest was threshed in autumn, some grain might be stored unthreshed. Winter would involve long hours of threshing, separating precious kernels from chaffs, often in cold, dusty conditions, a monotonous and physically demanding process. The cold itself exacerbated the physical toll of these labors. Your muscles would stiffen, your joints would ache, and your dexterity would be reduced by the freezing temperatures. Every swing of an axe, every lift of a heavy load, every precise movement of your hands would be more arduous and painful. Your body would constantly be expending precious energy just to stay warm, leaving you perpetually fatigued and susceptible to injury. It really sucked to have your body constantly working against itself. Lack of proper nutrition, as discussed in previous chapters, further compounded the misery of winter labor. Your body, already weakened by chronic malnutrition, had less energy reserves and a compromised immune system. This meant that minor ailments contracted while working in the cold could quickly escalate into life-threatening conditions like pneumonia. Your physical resilience was constantly being eroded by the combination of insufficient food and relentless toil in harsh conditions. One common misconception is that all Joseon peasants simply hibernated through winter, resting after the harvest. In reality, while agricultural activity slowed, essential labor for survival and preparation for the next year continued relentlessly. Winter was often a period of significant hardship and labor, characterized by tasks that were physically taxing and often dangerous due to the cold and frozen conditions. This continuous cycle of demanding work, even in the off-season, underscores the constant struggle for subsistence. Historians still meticulously study Joseon Dynasty agricultural manuals, administrative records detailing communal labor duties, and archaeological findings related to winter activities like tool maintenance areas to understand the precise nature and demands of peasant labor during the winter months, consistently revealing a surprisingly active and arduous period. Furthermore, the communal nature of some winter labor, such as canal dredging or large-scale fuel gathering, meant that cooperation was essential. However, it also meant you were working in close proximity to others who might be ill or exhausted, further increasing your risk of exposure to disease in already challenging conditions. Your survival depended on your own efforts, but also on the collective resilience or lack thereof of your community. The psychological toll of enduring such demanding labor in the bitter cold, day after day, with little warmth or proper rest, would be immense. You would live with a pervasive sense of physical discomfort, your muscles aching, your fingers numb, and your spirit weary. The knowledge that these labors were essential for your family's survival, even if they broke your body, would be a grim motivator. This constant physical battle with the elements, a daily testament to your endurance, made every winter a profound psychological burden, grinding away at your hope. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because winter labor was a demanding, often painful, continuation of your unending toil, from maintaining frozen tools and gathering fuel in biting winds to dredging icy canals and preparing manure. Every task was physically destructive and exposed you to extreme cold. This relentless cycle of arduous work, even as the land lay dormant, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your winter survival, directly contributing to widespread suffering and premature death. Even as your body struggled with the relentless cold, the insufficient clothing, and the demands of winter labor, your life as a Joseon peasant was perpetually overshadowed by a silent, insidious, killer disease and death. Forget glorious ends. The harsh winter months were a period of horrifying prevalence for illness, starvation-related fatalities, and the grim reality of primitive, often fatal, medical care, making your survival profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine the pervasive cold inside your hanok. While your ondol floor might be warm, the air above it, especially near the walls, remained chilly, your clothes were inadequate, and your body was constantly battling the cold. This persistent exposure to chill, combined with chronic malnutrition from a meager, monotonous diet lacking fresh vitamins and diverse nutrients, severely compromised your immune system. Your body's defenses, already weakened by hard labor and insufficient rest, were simply unable to fight off pathogens effectively. It truly sucked to have your body betray you from within. This weakened state made you highly susceptible to a wide array of infectious diseases that thrived in the crowded, often unsanitary conditions of a Joseon peasant household during winter. Respiratory illnesses. Colds would quickly escalate into severe bronchitis, pneumonia or pleurisy. The cold, damp air, combined with smoke inhalation from the ondol's agungi fireplace and the close proximity of family members, created ideal conditions for these lung infections. Imagine a hacking cough that racked your chest, your lungs filling with fluid, your breath coming in ragged gasps, knowing there was no effective medicine to offer relief, and witnessing your children suffer the same fate. Gastrointestinal diseases. Despite your best efforts at food preservation, spoilage and contamination were common as discussed in Chapter 2. You would suffer from frequent bouts of dysentery, the bloody flux, causing severe diarrhea, agonizing stomach cramps, and rapid dehydration. Typhoid fever and other waterborne illnesses, contracted from contaminated well water or stagnant sources, would also sweep through communities, rapidly debilitating and killing dozens. Vitamin deficiencies. As discussed in Chapter 5, the lack of fresh fruits and vegetables led to rampant, scurvy vitamin C deficiency. Imagine your gums bleeding, your teeth loosening, old wounds reopening, and profound fatigue setting in, making every movement painful. This wasn't just discomfort. It was a slow, agonizing bodily disintegration that made you vulnerable to every other disease. The mortality rate in winter was significantly higher than in other seasons, particularly for the most vulnerable members of your family: infants, young children, and the elderly. Their weaker immune systems and lower body fat reserves made them prime targets for the cold and disease. Imagine watching your child succumb to a fever, their tiny body burning, their breath shallow, or your elderly parent waste away from a cough that simply wouldn't go away, knowing there was nothing you could do. These were common, heartbreaking occurrences, leaving profound scars on the surviving family. It truly sucked to bury your own children in the freezing ground. Medical knowledge and care were primitive, while Joseon Korea had a sophisticated system of traditional medicine, rooted in principles of yin-yang and 5 elements. Effective treatments for severe infectious diseases were non-existent. Healers might prescribe complex herbal concoctions, perform acupuncture, or offer prayers, but these were often ineffective against virulent pathogens. There were no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory, and no hospitals as we know them. If you fell severely ill, your survival depended entirely on your body's own resilience and immense luck. Many resorted to desperate folk remedies, sometimes harmful. In a futile attempt to cling to life, the lack of sanitation in peasant homes and villages exacerbated the spread of disease. Waste disposal was rudimentary, contributing to widespread contamination. The cramped living quarters, where multiple generations huddled together for warmth, provided ideal conditions for illnesses to spread rapidly from person to person. A single sick individual could quickly infect an entire household, turning a hanok into a localized epidemic. One common misconception is that ancient societies, being closer to nature, were somehow healthier or immune to many diseases. In reality, while they didn't suffer from modern lifestyle diseases, they were constantly plagued by a vast array of infectious diseases, parasitic infections, and severe nutritional deficiencies that drastically shortened their lifespans. Winter, with its environmental hardships and food scarcity, was almost universally the deadliest season for pre-modern agrarian societies. Historians still meticulously study Joseon Dynasty medical texts like the Yuibang Yuchui, a massive medical encyclopedia, analyze skeletal remains from ancient burial sites, and examine administrative records detailing famine and disease outbreaks to reconstruct the precise prevalence, patterns, and impact of various illnesses on Joseon peasant populations, consistently confirming the brutal health realities of winter. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly battling sickness, of watching your loved ones suffer and die, and of knowing that your own body was always at risk, would be immense. This pervasive atmosphere of illness and death eroded morale, fostered despair, and made every day a grim countdown to the inevitable. Your existence was a perpetual struggle against unseen enemies, turning your home into a place of constant fear and sorrow. The sounds of coughing, the smell of sickness, and the sight of emaciated bodies would be a constant, harrowing reality, even if you yourself survived. So, Your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because disease and death were constant companions during winter. The pervasive cold, the chronic malnutrition, and the unsanitary living conditions made you perpetually vulnerable to rampant respiratory, gastrointestinal, and deficiency diseases that claimed lives at an astonishing rate. This horrifying prevalence of illness and the primitive medical care ensured that your majestic home was also a perpetually unhealthy and often deadly place to inhabit, making every winter a profound and agonizing fight for your very existence, even as your body struggled against the ravages of winter disease and your spirit withered under the grind of cold labor. Your Joseon peasant life was perpetually burdened by an even more relentless and unavoidable adversary, taxes and debt. Forget keeping your meager harvest, the state's unyielding grip on your resources, even in the harshest months, ensured a constant, crushing financial strain that made your winter survival profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine the end of autumn. After your backbreaking harvest, you've diligently gathered every grain, every vegetable, every bundle of straw, hoping it will be enough to last. But before you can even think about feeding your family through the long winter, the tax collectors arrive. The Joseon Dynasty operated a highly centralized state, and its very existence relied on the efficient collection of taxes, levies, and labor services from its vast peasant population. You, the humble peasant, were the primary source of the nation's revenue. A human ATM for the royal court in Hanyang. It truly sucked to literally work for the government, not your family. Taxes in Joseon Korea were complex and multifaceted, typically levied in three main forms, all of which weighed heavily on you, especially in winter. Land tax Jeonse. Jeonse, this was the primary tax, levied on your cultivated land. It was usually paid in grain rice, barley, or millet, and the amount was fixed. Regardless of the quality of your harvest or your personal struggles, imagine having to hand over a significant portion of your precious, hard-won grain, the very food your family needed to survive the winter, to a stern-faced official, knowing your children would be hungrier because of it. Tribute tax Gongnap. Gongnap. This was a local product tax, paid in specific goods from your region, depending on where you lived. You might be required to produce silk, cotton, paper, honey, or various other local specialties. This could be a significant burden, as these specialized products often required additional labor or resources to acquire, and their value was often assessed unfairly by officials. If your region didn't produce the item, you would have to purchase it from elsewhere, incurring extra costs. Labor service Yog, you, as a male peasant, were also obligated to perform various forms of labor service for the state. This could include military service for defense or construction projects, or corvée labor for public works like building roads, repairing canals, or maintaining government buildings. While often demanded in warmer months, the threat of being conscripted or having to pay a tax to avoid it loomed constantly, and preparing for it, e.g., repairing tools. Stockpiling food for absence consumed valuable winter time and resources. The problem was, these taxes were often inflexible and merciless. A bad harvest, caused by drought, flood, or pests, might devastate your family's ability to produce enough food for yourselves, yet the tax demands would likely remain the same, or only be marginally reduced after lengthy pleas and bribes to local officials. Failure to pay meant severe consequences, physical beatings with wooden rods, confiscation of your remaining grain, seizure of your tools or livestock, or even imprisonment and forced labor in mines or state projects. Imagine watching your family's last meager sacks of rice being taken away by officials, their faces cold and impassive, knowing starvation was now a certainty, It truly sucked to be taxed into oblivion. This relentless taxation often pushed peasant families into a spiraling cycle of debt. If you couldn't meet your tax obligations, you would be forced to borrow money from local moneylenders, often wealthy landowners or merchants who charged exorbitant interest rates. This meant you would spend years, even generations, working tirelessly just to pay off the interest, never truly escaping your financial obligations. Many peasants, trapped by this debt, effectively became tenant farmers on their own land, owing more to their creditors than they could ever hope to earn, reducing them to a state of perpetual economic servitude. It really sucked to owe your life to loan sharks. The winter months exacerbated this financial misery with no new crops growing and outdoor labor severely limited. Your family's income ceased almost entirely. Yet, the need for food, fuel, and basic necessities continued, and tax collectors, while less frequent, might still demand overdue payments. This created a profound winter debt, forcing you to rely on shrinking reserves or to borrow more, deepening your financial hole before spring even arrived. One common misconception is that Joseon Dynasty taxation was always based on the fair principles of the Confucian state. While Confucian ideals emphasize benevolent rule, the practical realities of a large, centralized bureaucracy often led to corruption, inefficiency, and excessive demands on the peasantry. Local officials might demand extra fees or gifts, or manipulate assessment records for personal gain. Adding to the already crushing burden, these unofficial levies were often far more difficult to appeal or escape than official taxes, pushing peasants deeper into misery. Historians still meticulously study Joseon Dynasty administrative records like the Gyeongguk Taejon, the Comprehensive Code of Laws, and local census records and unofficial accounts to understand the precise tax burdens and corrupt practices that plagued peasant life, revealing significant regional variations and periods of extreme exploitation. Furthermore, the very act of surviving a harsh winter often incurred additional, unexpected costs. A family member falling ill meant expensive and often ineffective herbal remedies or the need to trade precious food for a visit from a local healer. A particularly cold snap meant burning more precious firewood. These unforeseen expenses could quickly deplete your already meager reserves, forcing you deeper into debt and further undermining your ability to endure the winter. Your very efforts to survive inadvertently contributed to your financial ruin. The psychological toll of this constant financial pressure, this perpetual struggle against debt and taxation, would be immense. You would live with a gnawing anxiety about how to feed your family, how to pay the next tax installment, how to avoid the moneylender's wrath. This relentless burden would erode your spirit, making even the idea of a better future seem like an impossible dream. Your life became a testament to enduring financial chains, a constant battle against a system designed to extract every last bit of your labor and resources. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because your winter survival was perpetually undermined by taxes and debt, the state's unyielding grip on your meager harvest, the inflexibility of its demands, and the spiraling cycle of debt to ruthless moneylenders ensured a constant, crushing financial strain. This relentless economic burden was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your winter existence, forcing you to pay an agonizing price for every cold, hungry day you managed to survive, even as your body suffered the relentless cold, the gnawing hunger, and the crushing burden of taxes. Your survival through the Joseon winter often hinged on a delicate, yet often strained, balance social bonds, forget absolute self-reliance, community solidarity. While vital, was frequently stretched to its breaking point by the harshness of winter, making your survival profoundly brutal and taxing. Imagine your village, nestled in the snow-covered Korean countryside. Your hanok, like others, huddles together for what little collective warmth it can offer against the biting wind. In times of abundance, village life fostered strong communal ties. People helped each other with harvests, shared tools, and participated in village rituals. But winter, with its relentless demands and finite resources, put these bonds to the ultimate test. It truly sucked when your community was your last resort. Mutual aid was crucial if your family's harvest was particularly poor, or if a member fell ill and couldn't work. Your neighbors might offer a few handfuls of grain, a bundle of firewood, or help with a critical chore. This informal system of support, rooted in centuries of communal living, was a vital lifeline for those teetering on the brink of starvation. You would offer help when you could, hoping that generosity would be reciprocated in your own time of need. This was survival through collective resilience, a fragile but essential social safety net. It really sucked to depend on others for your life. However, the very harshness of winter meant that resources were incredibly scarce for everyone. Your neighbors, too, were battling hunger, cold, and debt. Their own reserves were dwindling, and their own families were shivering. This created a profound dilemma. How much could you truly share before you jeopardized your own family's survival? The line between compassion and self-preservation was incredibly thin, often leading to agonizing choices. Imagine a neighbor, gaunt with hunger, asking for food, and you having to weigh their desperation against the knowledge that every handful of rice you gave away meant a colder, hungrier day for your own children. It truly sucked when kindness put your own family at risk. This scarcity could, and often did, lead to social friction and resentment. Tensions would rise as food dwindled. Accusations of hoarding, of shirking communal duties, or of taking more than one's fair share could fester. The facade of community solidarity could crack under the immense pressure of survival, revealing underlying resentment and individual desperation. Feuds between families, exacerbated by hunger and suspicion, were not uncommon during these lean months. The structure of the village itself, with its focus on communal resources like wells and communal ovens if available, meant that shared hygiene practices were paramount. However, winter often made these communal spaces more challenging to maintain, further exacerbating the spread of disease as discussed in Chapter 7. Turning communal survival into a shared vulnerability. One common misconception is that all Joseon peasant villages were idyllic, perfectly harmonious communities. While strong communal bonds certainly existed and were essential for survival, the extreme hardships of Joseon life, particularly in winter, often put immense strain on these relationships. Famine and scarcity could lead to desperate acts, social friction, and a breakdown of trust, highlighting the fragility of community even in the face of shared adversity. Historians still meticulously study Joseon Dynasty village records, local judicial documents, and sociological analyses of traditional Korean communal living to understand the precise dynamics of cooperation and conflict within peasant communities, often revealing a complex interplay of solidarity and inherent tension. Furthermore, the threat of disease as discussed in Chapter 7, which spread rapidly in crowded, unsanitary winter homes, could further isolate families. If a family member fell ill with a contagious disease, other villagers might avoid contact, fearing contagion. This meant that, while mutual aid was generally practiced, extreme sickness could lead to further isolation, leaving the sick to suffer alone. highlighting the limits of communal support when facing truly deadly threats. The fear of death could override the bonds of neighborliness. The authority of local officials and landowners could also strain communal bonds when taxes were due or labor services demanded. These authorities would extract their dues regardless of the village's hardship, sometimes pushing already desperate peasants to betray each other or to report on those trying to hide resources to save their own families from punishment. This external pressure could shatter fragile internal solidarity. The psychological toll of living in a community perpetually on the brink, relying on fragile bonds, would be immense. You would constantly be weighing your family's needs against your neighbor's desperation, battling guilt and resentment. The knowledge that even your closest allies might be forced to prioritize their own survival over yours would erode trust and foster a profound sense of insecurity. Your community, meant to be a source of strength, could also become a source of profound internal conflict, a testament to the brutal choices forced upon you by winter. So, your daily life as a Joseon peasant was profoundly brutal and taxing because your winter survival, while relying on community solidarity, was constantly stretched to its breaking point by extreme hardship, the agonizing choices born of scarcity, the pervasive social friction, and the inherent limits of mutual aid made your reliance on communal bonds a precarious gamble. This fragile hope, constantly battling against individual desperation and the harsh realities of winter, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your existence, ensuring that even in shared misery, true comfort was elusive. You've endured the grim calculation of the harvest, battled against pervasive food spoilage and constant hunger, shivered in your deceptive hanok, worn inadequate clothing, endlessly toiled to fuel your heating system, suffered through brutal winter labor, faced the terrifying ravages of disease and death, and struggled under the crushing burden of taxes and debt, all while relying on fragile community bonds. As the last echoes of the biting wind fade and the phantom cold finally dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Joseon winter was not merely a season, it was a constant, brutal, and often losing battle. A relentless struggle for survival that defined your entire existence as a peasant, leaving a legacy of immense, unyielding hardship. Consider the absolute precariousness of your life. Every single year, your family's survival hinged on a delicate balance, a successful autumn harvest, meticulous food preservation against relentless pests and spoilage, constant, backbreaking labor to gather fuel for warmth, and sufficient resilience to fight off the inevitable diseases that swept through your unhygienic home. There was no buffer, no safety net, a single bad harvest, a severe cold snap, or an unforeseen illness could send your family spiraling into destitution, starvation, or death. Your existence was a perpetual dance on the knife edge of subsistence. It truly sucked to live in constant fear of winter. Then there's the unrelenting physical and emotional toll. Your body was perpetually cold, constantly hungry, and frequently sick, worn down by continuous physical labor even in the depths of winter. Your hands were raw, your muscles ached, and your lungs struggled against the cold and smoke. Emotionally, you lived with pervasive anxiety about food, fuel, and taxes, the constant fear of losing family members to disease or starvation, the difficult choices about who to share with, and the profound sense of helplessness against the forces of nature and the state, chipped away at your spirit, leaving you weary and often despairing. Your life was a testament to endurance, but rarely to true comfort or joy. And what about the inescapable economic burden, taxes? levied in kind, mercilessly stripped away your precious harvest, pushing you deeper into poverty even before winter began. The spiraling cycle of debt to ruthless moneylenders, exacerbated by unforeseen emergencies and the lack of winter income, was a financial chain that bound you for life, often passing down to your children. This relentless economic exploitation ensured that your struggle was not just against nature, but against a system designed to extract every last bit of your labor and resources, leaving you perpetually impoverished. It truly sucked to work so hard for so little. Finally, the paradox of community. While mutual aid and communal bonds were essential for survival, providing a fragile lifeline, they were often stretched to their breaking point by widespread scarcity. The kindness of neighbors was constantly weighed against the desperate needs of one's own family, leading to difficult choices and potential resentment, even in shared misery. True comfort and unwavering solidarity were elusive, as individual desperation could easily override collective spirit. Your community was a source of strength, but also a reflection of shared vulnerability. The overall impact of Joseon winter was a population that, while incredibly resilient, bore the pervasive scars of chronic hardship. This affected everything from their physical stature and long-term health to their social structures and their very worldview. The strength of the Joseon peasant was born not of abundance, but of the sheer tenacity to survive on so little, a testament to their enduring spirit rather than their comfortable living. One particularly poignant and often overlooked detail is the role of ancestral rites geisa during the harsh winter, even amidst extreme cold and scarcity. Peasant families would meticulously prepare small offerings of food for their ancestors, often at significant personal cost. This unwavering commitment to ancestral reverence, even when their own children were hungry, highlights the deep spiritual and cultural fortitude that helped them endure the physical brutality of winter. These rites provided a sense of continuity, purpose, and connection to a lineage that transcended immediate suffering, offering a form of spiritual warmth when physical warmth was scarce. Historians still meticulously study Joseon period family rituals and Confucian practices to understand how these cultural elements provided crucial psychological and social support in the face of pervasive hardship. Ultimately, your life as a Joseon peasant, especially during the long, unforgiving winter, was a brutal and taxing ordeal that defined your entire existence. It was a constant battle against the elements, against hunger, disease, debt, and the relentless demands of the state. Your struggle for survival was a testament to human endurance, but it was a life perpetually on the brink, marked by profound physical suffering and pervasive anxiety. The seemingly peaceful Joseon countryside was, for its peasants, a relentless winter battlefield, demanding immense sacrifice for every cold, hungry day you managed to survive. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant sounds of the cold Joseon countryside and the imagined ache of a hungry stomach finally subside. You are safe, warm, and well-fed, incredibly far removed from the brutal realities of a Joseon peasant's winter. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of warmth, abundant food, and the profound comfort of a secure existence. A stark contrast to the brutal and taxing truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night and have sweet dreams. Sweet